Hi friends, this is Josh. I'm one of the other hosts of the From Junk to Jank podcast, along with Ryan. How you doing today, everybody? I'm a bit sick today. I actually had to take the day off of work because I'm not feeling well. So if my voice is a little rough, just bear with me during this. Uh, yeah. But anyway, I'm here. Um, I'm not taking it through a league like Ryan is, at least with this deck right now, because I'm still in the testing process with this deck. I'm trying to find a 75 that I'm comfortable with. This is the deck I've been working on an insane amount in Pioneer. This deck is Jeskai Fire's Superfriends. This deck is looking to take advantage of the card Fires of Invention, which reads 3 in a red. You may cast spells only during your turn. You can cast no more than 2 spells each turn. That kind of sucks, but you may cast spells with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control without playing their mana costs. So, um, so basically, our plan with this deck is to survive the turn 4, cast a Fires of Invention, hopefully turn 4 either disrupt what our opponent is doing, or get to parity with our opponent, and then use our various planeswalkers to take over the game. As far as our planeswalker package, what we're doing today, this gets shifted around quite a bit. But what's going on right now is there's a couple copies of Gideon of the Trials, which is really good against two of the big decks in the format right now, Inverter and Lotus Breach. It's a 3 mana 1 white planeswalker. Until the next, you can tick them up to bubble a permanent, basically prevent all damage that permanent deals. It does prevent non-combat damage as well. You can zero him to make him into a 4/4 if we need a beater, and then his most important ability in this current meta is his zero. You will get an emblem as long as you control a Gideon Planeswalker, you can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. What I've been trying to do is I've been trying to leverage other Gideon Planeswalkers in this deck, and haven't felt like they've been that great. But I think I'm gonna keep trying to slot in a 4 mana Gideon Ally of Zendikar, the one from Battle for Zendikar, just because it can make blockers and be our big beater and be another roadblock for those decks that we want Gideon's emblem for. Other card advantage planeswalkers, we got Narset Porter of Veils. Narset Porter of Veils is broken. It's basically search risk contact activations for us twice for each one, so she can draw us up to 2 cards on her own. She's gonna always, most of the time, draw us an impactful spell. We don't have any creatures in our main deck except for these 3 Fae of Wishes, which I'll explain a little bit later. But her point's to find us more cards to work with. Also on the card advantage, we're trying out, and this is the new tech that I'm trying out, is 2 copies of the Royal Scions, which this deck, there are some things that don't work in some matchups. So what I'm trying to do with the Royal Scions is like turn those cards into cards that matter. By its +1 of drawing a card and discarding a card, plus the ultimate on the Royal Scions, it gets to it insanely fast, and just drawing 4 cards and dealing damage could potentially be that last minute bit of swing we need, or could be the thing that we need to kill a creature that's staring us down. As far as other card advantage, we have Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Jace, Architect of Thought. Jace Architect of Thought is basically here against the go wide decks to try to muffle the amount of damage that they do. But he has a mini Factor Fiction on his minus, revealing the top 3 cards of your library. Opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, with 1 pile in your hand, the other pile on the bottom of your library in any order. The correct line, this deck usually is just picking the 2 cards, unless the 1 card is very good, but usually you just pick the 2 cards because you want as many cards in your hand as you can. The very Hero Dominaria scored just standard. Blue Eye Control still uses it pretty well. It just draws a card. We can't really take advantage of the untapped 2 lands except for Fae of Wish's activation, but that's perfectly fine. Even just holding up for Fae of Wish activations or Castle Vantress late in the game is really good for us. Other card advantage, I guess Nicobolas counts as card advantage as well as a finisher, because his uptick draws a card and the opponent exiles a card from their hand or a permanent on the battlefield. It's really good when your opponent doesn't have anything else going on. It also can just straight up just destroy a creature or planeswalker. Also, is just his -8 just makes our opponent lose the game if they don't have a legendary permanent. If they don't have a legendary creature or planeswalker. This deck wants to make sure that the other side of the board is clear as possible at all times. So getting to that ultimate and having that ultimate, not having that ultimate trigger when we do activate it usually is fairly easy. Also in the top end too has another finisher with Elspeth Sun's Champion. Her +1 just runs either runs control decks over, or creature decks can't get through the creature token. She also has a sweeper mode on her as a necessary, if we do end up needing that. And her emblem is just creatures you control get +2/+2 and flying. It's not super relevant, but it can be relevant if you have a large board of soldiers and you just want to get the game over with. That's a great way to get the game over with. As far as protection and interaction goes, we are very much a sorcery speed deck, which kind of hurts us in some matchups. But we try to break that symmetry with Teferi Time Raveler. By playing Teferi, our opponent can also only play at sorcery speed. Teferi is usually the most important planeswalker to protect, because not only does he save you against counter spells, he saves you against flash threats. The only thing he doesn't save you against is haste threats, which is those matchups tend to be bad anyway. But it is what it is. We can't beat everything, especially with a deck like this. As far as other interaction, we have Deafening Clarion for the low to the ground aggro decks, and Supreme Verdict as a more catch-all sweeper. Chandra Torture Defiance is also here as a card advantage and removal. She usually when you're playing her 9 times out of 10, she's coming down and 4ing something, but her emblem can also win the game. Also, occasionally we try this out. Today we're trying this out, the one-of copy Ota Teferi in the main deck. I'm not sure how good this actually is, and usually this ends up being a sideboard card, because wishing for Ota Teferi usually ends up being better than just having it most of the time. But Ota Teferi basically lets us activate our planeswalkers 2 times a turn and lets us get to our planeswalker ultimates faster. The only other thing I haven't mentioned yet is our land base and our creatures. We're only running 3 creatures. The reason that we're running this creature is because of the adventure on it, granted, which allows us to choose a non-creature card we own from our sideboard and bring it into the game. We have a plethora of options that we can take. We have Supreme Verdict and Merciless Eviction, should we ever need to clean up the board. Casualties of War has a catch-all answer, can destroy pretty much anything, can even put our opponent back on lands. Nicobolas Dragon God just is another copy of our best planeswalker, by far our best planeswalker. Possibility Storm actually locks out our opponent when we have Teferi Time Raveler on the battlefield. They can't cast spells, so usually if we're wishing for this, our opponent's dead. That means that we can continue to cast spells, and while the spells that we cast aren't going to be the spells that we cast, we can continue to cast spells through Possibility Storm, where our opponents cannot. Thought Distortion just as disruption. It's a great disruption tool for the counterspell decks. It's a great way to just make sure they have nothing else going on in their hand. Sarkhan the Masterless in the sideboard. Usually there's a copy in the main deck. Right now there's not. He's usually one of the worst planeswalkers in the main deck. He creates, basically the turn he comes down, he usually just creates a 4/4 dragon, and his main utility is in his uptick, which allows all your planeswalkers to attack for 4. They can still be dealt damage and are not indestructible, so keep that in mind. Days Undoing combos with Narset to make sure our opponent doesn't have a hand, so it's also great against these the control decks as well. If we have Teferi Time Raveler, Narset Parter Avails, and Days Undoing in our hand, if we don't have a Fire's Invention, we can, on our opponent's draw step, cast Days Undoing, basically emptying their hand and ending their turn. So it's definitely, we don't really like using Days Undoing when we have fires out, but it's a way that we can gas up if necessary, and make sure that our opponent will not be able to gas up, or only will draw one card if we have Narset out. We basically never cast this card unless we have Narset Parter Veils out, which is why we have the 4 Narsets. All of these things can be changed around depending on your local meta. So if you like this deck, I recommend switching and tooling for your meta. It's a very important thing to do. This deck is definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of deck. You definitely need to bob and weave according to the meta a little bit, like because there's definitely a lot of options that you have, but you definitely have to bob and weave a bit. Also, Pithing Needle for opposing planeswalkers stops Heliod combo, stops Lotus Reach from making copies of Lotus Field with Thespian Stage, Damping Sphere against Lotus Field, mostly because it prevents them from, it basically makes their Lotus Field unusable. And it basically doesn't affect us. And a copy of Oketra's Last Mercy in the sideboard for the aggro matchups. Aggro matchups tend to be a bit hard unless we have a sweeper in our opening hand. Against the aggro decks, the plan is to get to 4 mana, be able to cast fires, and have one of these sweepers in our hand. Once we have one of these sweepers on our hand, if we can Fey for Oketra's Last Mercy, that is usually game against the aggro decks, because then what we're doing just takes advantage of the game from there. But anyway, that was a deck tech on the current version of Fire Super Friends. I constantly mess with this deck, so the version that you see now is not going to be the version I'm going to be on a week from now. So if you're interested in seeing what my current build is, just ask me. I'd love to show off what I'm working on. Everything changes with this deck, as I said. Like, nothing is set in stone at any point. Everything's like, it's got a bob and weave at the meta. This, more than any other deck that I ever play, has to bob and weave at the meta a bit more. So yeah, that's basically that deck. Stay tuned. What I'm gonna do mostly is show my testing on the open rooms with this deck, because this deck's not a deck that I'm comfortable with running through leagues on a regularity unless I know what's going on with the meta, which is not always the easiest thing to do. Anyway, thank you guys. We'll see another video coming up where we do some practice with this deck. I'll discuss lines and how I feel about the certain choices that I made with this deck, and what changes I would make based on what I've seen. Anyway, see you guys next time.